Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so good to be back. I remember, how long ago was that I was last here? 6 months maybe. You guys have done some great stuff with this place. And as I remember standing here the first time, I just remember the feeling in this room was so palpable. The love in this room, the excitement, the energy in this room was just so palpable. And so thank you for bringing me back. Dear Betty over here reminded me of something really amazing. She came up to me and asked me if I happened to be related to any of the ministers that came out of the 1960s. You know, when Ernest Holmes was around. I said, unfortunately, no. I mean, we have a lineage of ministers in my family, and my mother is also a religious science minister. But she kind of took me back to some of the ministers of that day that I have heard of or have heard their talks when Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, was alive and around. And I just was like, man, just reflecting in that moment after you stepped away that I'm so fortunate and have been fortunate to have grown up in a teaching like this. And people remind me all the time, and sometimes I scoff it off, like, you know, I always get, if I was your age, like, you know, I wish I had had it when I was your age, and it's just like at some point I'm like, ugh, like, why am I hearing this again? But actually, I'm really grateful because it has, as many of you probably know, having been in a teaching like this, it has transformed my life in such a powerful and profound way. And so as I was looking at the topic that I had chosen for this week, you know, we give our titles months in advance. And so at the time, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. It's months away. But as life always has it, and as the universe always provides for me the perfect message to give on the perfect Sunday. And so my topic today is called The Greatest Love of All. And I'll be honest with you, when I was putting this together, I thought, wow, this is going to be a little bit of a different type of talk that I would normally give. Because it's requiring a certain vulnerability within me that I would say I'm already typically pretty vulnerable on stage, but a vulnerability within me about things and concepts and practices that I am on my leaning into my growing edge right now. And so what I know is that we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. And we also have a saying, you know, you have to feel it to heal it. And so I understand and realize that what I want to share today, the jewels that are coming through from this talk, they may sound simple. And they may sound like, oh yeah, I've heard that every day. But in truth and practice, it can be a whole nother story and an actual evolution of a lifetime of working through. And so I'm kind of writing this high right now from the royal wedding yesterday. Did anyone watch the royal wedding? Yeah. I did not wake up at 4 in the morning because I knew they would replay it like over and over, like all day for 8 hours. And I was in tears throughout the whole wedding, not because of that fantasy that so many of us look at as like, you know, I want that kind of wedding, but it was so much more than that. It was about the power of what love can do in the midst of seeming judgments and sarcasm and conflict. If you've noticed, there's been a lot of talk about this wedding, the interracial marriage and the non-traditional way of nature of all of it. And regardless of what you believe about it, that's okay. It was just the fact that history had been made in such a way that two people could come together in love from this place and it be acknowledged. I'm still stunned by the whole thing. But I also have been realizing that in our world at this time, within my own life and with a lot of people that I'm talking to, is that many people are going through challenges, going through loss, through struggle, and sometimes it's hard to find love in the midst of that. Sometimes it's hard to remember what is the greatest love of all. What is the greatest love of all? I was remembering a show on Oprah, I think it was back in 2006, where she had 2 sisters on her show from Rwanda, and they were refugees from the Rwandan genocide that happened, I don't remember when that was, maybe in the 90s? And she brought them on her show so that they could tell their story. Clementine and Claire are their names, and they witnessed the murdering of their family. They hid in a bathroom for 100 days. and they spent 6 years in refugee camps across Africa. They did not know if their parents were dead or alive, and in the year 2000, they immigrated to the US. And so after years of searching, an acquaintance told Clementine and Claire that their parents were actually alive. And so they were able to reconnect over the phone, but they had not seen them in person since the genocide for 12 years. So as these girls stood on Oprah's stage, as Oprah is such an incredible being, she announced that she had flown their parents to meet them in Chicago. You can go online and Google the photographs. It's incredible. It's incredible to see the perseverance, the hope, of course, the tears and the joy that these individuals experienced by being connected to their family. But you also just look at what is that? Not just the perseverance, but the will of the human spirit. I'm also reminded of one of my favorite writers and just people in general is Elie Wiesel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's one of the most admired and honoring or respected people of Oprah's as well. He's an author, a scholar, and he's actually a Holocaust survivor. And at 15 years old, he and his family were deported by the Gestapo to the Auschwitz death camp, and they were separated. And then, of course, they endured the unthinkable: starvation, torture, disease, not to mention, all the people that he lost. But Oprah says that the miraculous part of his story is not just that he survived, but that he went on to live without hate. He said to her, "The anger here is in me, hate is not. I write and I teach, and therefore I believe anger must be a catalyst." And so I was thinking about this in regards to my own life and to the lives of many that I talk to every day, is that we experience pain. That pain is just information. We can use pain and anger as a catalyst for greater healing if we're willing to go there. If you remember the last time I was here, I talked about the shadow. I talked a little bit about the disowned parts of ourselves, the parts of us we don't want people to know about, how we must have the light and the dark in order to fully, pull out, bring up the stuff that we wish to transform and heal. And Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Science of Mind teaching, says that there is nothing really ultimately to be healed, but for truth to be revealed. And so what that means to me is that every single one of us is part of the wholeness of our life, that we in fact are whole. Yet there are ways of being and things that we've bought into and believed from, you could say childhood, from conditioning, from society, that has us believing that we are separate, has us believing that we don't belong to one another. And so I look at pain as one of my greatest teachers. Have you ever thought about just thanking your pain for coming? Because there's something within the midst of the dark night of the soul that I don't think, at least for my own life, I truly could have experienced or recognized had I not gone through it. Because we don't always get those ahas in the midst of joy. We can. But I think that our challenges can teach us so much. Each one of these stories has something in common. They have the commonality of hope, of determination, of acceptance of what is. All values that we strive to live by. And so, what are the things that most impact our lives to our core that we actually have control over? I don't know about you, but I would really like to control most of the outcomes of my life. I want them to look like a perfect little wrapped present, and I want them to look a certain way. But life doesn't do that, does it? It doesn't always reveal that to us. And so I was reading a quote by Michael Franti, the musician. He's such a cool guy. He says, "I believe there is no one you wouldn't love if you knew their story. When I learn about someone else's experience, I'm always inspired to hear they share the same fears and hopes that I do. And in the ever-changing world, I look for the optimism of people who can find opportunity in the face of everyday challenges." How many of you have heard the song, "The Greatest Love of All"? Yeah? Do you want to sing it with me? I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Then we'll go to the chorus. I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. If I fail, if I succeed, at least I live as I believed. No matter what you take from me, you can't take away my dignity, because the greatest love of all is happening to me. I found the greatest love of all inside of me. Good job. You know that. But there's a line in that song where she says, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. So I had to break down this song. I was like, okay, Whitney Houston made this song a hit, and if you didn't know this, George Benson actually sang that song before her. The song was written by a woman named Linda Creed, who was also known, her married name, Linda Epstein. Have you heard of her? She was an American singer-songwriter who teamed up with songwriter-producer Tom Bell to produce some of the most successful Philadelphia soul groups of the 1970s. So the lyrics of this song were actually written in the midst of her struggle with breast cancer. The words describe her feelings about coping with great challenges, the ones that we must face in life, being strong during those challenges. And in the spring of 1986, Whitney Houston, of course, recorded this, and she topped the charts. But before she reached #1, Linda died of breast cancer. And then the following year, her family and friends established the Linda Creed Breast Cancer Foundation, and in 1992, she was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Now, I did not know that. Like, I did not know that this song was actually written from an individual, a woman who was going through such hardship and such struggle. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. So what does this mean for us? So what is the actual teaching here? The jewels that I was speaking about earlier, that seems so simple, and yet it's a lifetime of practice, I assure you. As we walk along the path of coping and defending and protecting ourselves, going through challenges, we often think, and I know you pointed this out earlier this morning, was that we think that our good is somewhere outside of us. We think that the perfect job will bring us that success. We think that the best relationship, the perfect relationship, is going to make us whole. We think that the conditions of the world, everything is an effect. Everything out there is going to somehow make me okay and make me feel good. And so many of us, if you notice, we're living in reactivity to life. We're living into, I will be this if this happens. As opposed to, I'm going to do the inner work and start from the inside out so that what I'm working on from within is actually reflected out back into the world. It's something we're not really taught all that often, especially in our culture, that we must get everything outside of ourselves. We're just taught this. And so what is our true source? That's what we have to cultivate, to come back to be reminded of, that our source is not our job. My relationship is definitely not my source. And so can we be in more responsiveness and less reactivity? Our childhoods, I know my childhood taught me that the only way I could receive love was to accept less, was to struggle, was to compromise my needs, was to be a doormat. Some of us may have been taught that abuse means love. Or maybe on the other extreme, you were told, don't be too loud, don't be too sensitive, don't be too emotional, don't be too something, don't be who you are. And of course we know this is a lie. That in truth, we don't need permission to be powerful. So this is one of my mantras for this year. I don't need permission to be powerful. So say this to yourself. I do not need any permission to be powerful. I do not need any permission to be powerful. You are powerful because you exist. You're powerful because you exist. We don't need authority. We don't need some great teacher out there, some guru. We don't need anybody to make us okay. To say, I give you permission now to be bold, and to be great, to be big. And so, the greatest love of all is actually you. You are the greatest love of all. The cosmic love of all. And so what does that mean? That means, and this is the part where I'm like, oh man, this is not always the easy stuff. We have to commit to our own healing. Committing to our own healing means my work is my work. So my minister in Oakland says, your work is your work. It's not anybody else's. They may have work to do, but you get to stay in your own lane. Your work is your work. So your pain and your challenges that you're experiencing are enough. You don't have to exacerbate it by going and taking on someone else's pain. It's also understanding that a commitment to something in life, a commitment to another, is impossible without the commitment to ourselves. We have to speak the truth and not sacrifice ourselves or compromise our needs in toxic and dysfunctional relationships and with people by choosing to honor ourselves. And that is not always an easy path, to honor ourselves. My mother always said, Savanna, you teach people how to treat you. And it hasn't been until now, I'm 34 years of age, that I'm finally like, oh, I think I'm starting to get what that means. Of actually honoring myself and respecting myself and doing the inner work of committing to my own healing no matter what. No matter what anybody else is doing out there. How many of you have been told relationships are mirrors for our growth? Relationships are mirrors for our growth. Most often, we will see in someone else the things that we don't want to look at within ourselves. They bring up all the stuff for us to be aware of. And so I contend that the most difficult and challenging of circumstances do foster the greatest spiritual growth, for sure. Your experience is perfect for you. So stop judging it. This is a mantra that I've been taking into my prayer work lately, is my experience is mine, and I don't need to judge it. Because my experience and your experience are bringing you the lessons that you need to learn to move beyond your own fears and your own guilt. Paul Ferrini is one of my favorite writers in the whole world. He wrote a book called Love Without Conditions. And he says, when love is given to you without conditions, you know it because it honors you. It doesn't manipulate you or demand more than you can give. The other thing that we must practice is forgiving anyway. And as we know, forgiveness is not about condoning what someone did or saying that it was okay what someone did. It's freeing yourself from the energy, from the power that you're giving this other person or the situation. It's freeing yourself so that you can move forward with grace, with power, with an inner strength. I was listening to an interview with Marianne Williamson recently and Oprah, and Oprah said she called up Marianne one day because she was so upset that she had been betrayed by somebody, and she said, I've been through the ultimate betrayal. And Oprah says, I'll never forget your response to me. She said, you told me to pray for them. And Oprah was like, are you kidding me? I don't want to pray for them. They hurt me so badly. She says, well, you need to pray for them. You need to pray for their highest and best. And at the time, Oprah thought this was crazy, but what Marianne said to her was, if you're praying for that person's highest and best, then ultimately what will happen is either they will shift, or B, you won't care. You won't care. Because you will be free of all of the hostility and the anger that you've had about this situation, because you've surrendered it in prayer. You've given it over. I thought that was just so incredible. And so I'm going to start practicing that. Can you start practicing that? Start praying for the people who've hurt you, even though it's not easy. I remember a few years ago, my mother shared with me a story about how she and my father, who they haven't been married for probably 30-something years, and they didn't talk for 20-something years of those because there was so much hostility, a really bad divorce. And I just remember one day she came home and she said, you're never going to believe this, but your father called me, and we talked for like over an hour. I said, you know, what happened? Was there like a death in the family? You know, like what happened? And she said, I've been praying for him. I said, really? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I have been doing forgiveness work for every single person in my life that I need to make amends with because I'm tired of being angry. And she said, I forgave him. And I said, well, did you ever get an apology? She goes, no, but I forgave him. I don't need his apology. And she said, so he called me like we were best friends. He talked to me for like an hour. It was the best conversation we've had in over 20 years. She's like, I can't even believe it. She goes, except that I forgave him. And so it was like, wow, okay, so the outside completely shifted because of her own internal, work. Just something to think about, or do, or practice. The next thing is that self-love is the way. So I think that self-love is the antidote for narcissism, for sure. What I'm finding in my life is that with every single challenge is that it all comes back to that one thing, our own self-love. It all starts here. So rather than abandoning ourselves and operating from old ways of being, remembering to love ourselves, to honor ourselves. And I think, like I said, it seems so simple, but I didn't grow up with that, did you? I didn't. The message that I grew up with was that you're not worthy, that you don't have enough, there's not enough, good to go around, that we get it everywhere. And so, taking the time in your daily spiritual practice, if you hold some sort of spiritual practice, to really just love and nurture yourself and not be so hard on yourself. When you really start to have that self-judgment, to just, pat yourself on the back and say, everything is okay. I am okay. I am enough just as I am, in my faults and in my successes. So Paul Ferrini says again, he says, when you have the courage to look within, the light will appear. You cannot heal if you are activated, projecting your pain or being the target of others' projections. You are not powerless. You are powerful. When you have the courage to look within, the light will appear. As long as you are afraid to look at the darkness, the light cannot come. When you are ready to face your fears and bring love to all the wounded places in your heart and mind, then the light of awareness is lit. It is the beacon that illuminates all the shadows. And so I guess the question really is, how willing are you to look at the stuff? To just look at it and to be kind to yourself and to be gentle and to love the aspects of you that maybe you don't like all that much. We definitely have a lot of self-judgment, don't we? Especially so. About other people, of course, but also about ourselves. Can you forgive anyway? It could be a good practice to just make a list of all the people you want to forgive. I know that they do this in 12-step groups, don't they? You make amends. It's such an important piece of that program. I think it's an important piece of all life. I've heard so many different spiritual leaders say that, forgiveness. It's about forgiveness. And about your own self-love. How can you love yourself the most today? I have this sticky note on my mirror that says, love yourself the most. You are a treasure. So I will just close with a prayer, if you're open to it. So let's just close our eyes and go within, however you like to do that. So just giving thanks in this moment for the power of love itself, for the power and presence of the one life, for I know it is everywhere and always. That this love is the essence of all there is. It is the oneness, it is the goodness, it is the joy, it is the peace, and it is that inner knowing that each and every one of us possess within us. We are truly connected to this life. For I know that there is no separation, for it is the only thing there is. It is the omnipotence of everything. And so I give thanks in this moment to speak my word on behalf of every single individual in this room, knowing that we are open and receptive to love itself, that we are open and receptive to divine guidance, to the unfolding of our life in the most miraculous of ways, for every hope and desire that we so want to experience in our lives. I know that we come back to the awareness in the center of who we are, that we recognize who and whose we are in every moment, this powerful, unique, individualized expression of the one life itself. That we stay activated with this awareness that we are powerful, that we do not need anything outside of ourselves to be whole, to be okay, for I know that we are absolutely made in wholeness, in love itself. And so I give thanks for the myriad of ways that we are called to serve, that we are called to express our gifts, for I know that each and every one of us has that gift, has that spark that lives within us, that we are here to give, to serve, to embody, to become, and to transform. And so I claim this goodness now. I claim the highest and best for every single person here. And if there's anybody in your life right now that you feel needs a little bit extra love and prayer, hold them in your heart right now. And if you want to whisper their name out loud, you can do that too. For Lord, we know that they are surrounded, guarded, protected, and nurtured in every way. That there is something within each and every one of us that is pulling us towards a vision for our lives that is serving humanity in a greater way and serving ourselves. We remember the love that we are. And so I give thanks for this prayer and for this message. And I let it go, surrendering now, and let it be. And so it is. Amen. Thank you, everybody. I think I finished on time. I'm a little early.